My story involves mass transit. And I was born and raised in Pickens, South Carolina, the youngest of 7 children. So anything we did was mass transit. And in my youth, one of the forms of mass transit that we used was school buses. We lived out in the country, poor kids, poor family, living in a little farm out in the middle of nowhere. We rode the school bus when we went to school because my parents both worked and they were gone to work by the time it was time to go to school. And so we rode school buses, but in my family, the Craig family, we had a tradition that we didn't just ride those school buses, we drove those school buses. Because in that time, the students in South Carolina could drive school buses. And they've changed that a while since then. I don't really know why. But I'm the youngest of 7 children. 6 of the 7 children in my family drove school buses. Now, the exception is my brother Charles, who lost, well, I guess he wasn't really eligible for a license because he had been running from the police in the car and wrecked at the age of 14. So he wasn't able to get it. He's the exception, but we gave him a pass. 6 out of 7 drove school buses. So, go with me now, if you would, back in time to August of 1974. That is the beginning of my junior year. Rather than have you do high-level math in your head, I'm 53 and I'm happy to be here. Junior year, at the mid-August, early August of 1974, I had just turned 16 a week to 2 weeks before that. So I had my real license. And I was sitting in class the morning of my first day at school on my junior year, and someone came to the door and asked for Sam Craig to come to the office. Now, I got to tell you, since about the first grade, I had been alleged to have been a smart-ass troublemaker. So having someone come to the door and ask for Sam Craig was really not exactly an unusual circumstance. But the first day, now come on. And I was in the morning. I hadn't even been there long enough to get in trouble yet. So I went down and I went to the assistant principal's office. And I normally went to the principal's office, so this was unusual to go to the principal's office, assistant principal's office. And I went in, and the assistant principal said, "Craig?" "Yes." "You gonna drive a school bus?" "Yes." "Go out in the parking lot and get on the bus, and gonna take the test." Okay. Whatever. You know, I'm Craig, school bus, makes sense. They assumed it, I assumed it too, really. So I went on out the parking lot and got on a school bus with 3 or 4 other young people that didn't know what they were doing either. And got on the bus, and so I'm sitting there and we kind of waiting. And the instructor walks up and gets on the bus and he looks at his clipboard and he says, "Craig, get up here and show us how it's done." You know, I have to admit, I had driven a school bus, one of my sister's school buses, around in the yard. I had not driven one on the road, but you know, it's almost genetic with a Craig. So, you know, I knew when to put the door out for us crossing a railroad track, and I knew when to flip the sign out for us, you coming to a stop and how far it took. And, I even knew how to look at the little mirror they have right above you where you look back in the back of the bus and say, "Sit down and shut up." I knew everything. I was Craig. So I got on there, and he told me the route to take. And I threw the doors open, popped the signs out, did everything. It was a breeze. Perfect. Got back to the school, and we spent the rest of the morning watching these other bozos on that bus have the, "No, put the door open, it's around. No, put the sign out. You didn't put the..." Oh, thank God it was over later that morning. And I passed the test with flying colors. Now, I'm not saying I'm good or anything, but I probably am, but they fired a driver that had driven the school bus to school that morning. First day at school, they fired him and gave me his route. And I drove that bus home that afternoon with a load of kids, including the guy that had gotten fired. And it was a very uncomfortable ride home. But I quickly switched off of that route because I was a poor kid and I wanted the longest route I could get because you got paid more money. You got the longer route, you got paid by the mile. The longer route, you got paid more. So I wanted the longest route, so I got the longest route I could get. I got the longest route at Pickens High School. And I drove that route. Now, just a few weeks later, remember this is 1974, they called me back to the office and said, Sam, we want you to drive one of the black routes. Now, remember, it's 1974, and we had two black routes. One high school black route and one junior high black route. There was a section of this small town that was the black section of town. And they had tried to get some other drivers to drive the junior high black route. We had two drivers at the start of the year, but for whatever reason, the second black driver quit. And they tried to find someone else to drive the junior high black route. And they had tried several other people because I had the longest route already. But then they came to me. And here I am, fuzzy-headed, you know, man, whatever. And so I said, sure, it didn't bother me. So, so after that, I started driving my longest route in the morning. So I kind of had to move that up a little bit. And then I would get to school, drop off all my people, and then I would go ride and do the junior high black route. And so, okay, fair enough, no problem. Go with me if you will. Forward in time to the last day at school, 1975, about this time in 1975. Last day at school. Driving to school on the last day of school. I didn't have any exams that day. It was a half day, a couple of exams that morning, but hey, I got paid to go to school. You know, I'm driving the bus, baby. And so, you know, and one of the things about the tradition of the last day of school on a school bus at that time was that on the way home, everybody would do crazy stuff and have water fights and throw things and do it. What are they going to do? Send you home? You know, it's the last day of school. And so that was kind of a tradition, was that you would spend your time on the way home just doing whatever it took. You know, what are you going to do to me? And so, you know, and as school bus drivers, we all knew that. That was going to happen. But so that morning, I drove my longest route. And I dropped my kids off. And then I went out and I drove the black route. And I came to a stop saying, oh, well, I will tell you one thing. I was a very good and very conscientious school bus driver. I did not smoke dope until I got to school. And I made sure my head was clear before I drove home. I took it serious. So I drove that bus. And I was coming, and I came up to a stop sign. And I still remember it. And it's what I always did, and probably still do. I looked left, because that's what will kill you. I looked right. I looked back left. And then I glanced up to see what was going on, make sure nobody was standing up and as I started off. Because you take those buses, they take a little bit to get going. And when I glanced up, at that moment, an egg hit me in the back of the head. And splattered, kind of caught a glancing blow, hit my head, and splattered up onto the mirror. And another egg hit the mirror. Now, I've got to admit that whoever threw two eggs, both of them, those are pretty good shots from the back of the bus. I got to give them credit for that. But one of them hit me in the back of the head, just a glancing blow, not a whole splatter, but just. And so I looked up at this mirror, and I couldn't see anything. I couldn't see who did it. Now, I have a temper. I try not to exhibit it too often, but I have a temper, and that really made me mad. And so I stood up and said, "Who did it? Who did it?" And that bus went quiet. And at just that moment, I turned around facing the kids on this bus, "Who did it?" And a police car comes up behind me. So I open the door and I go out and I get that police officer. And I say, you know, they hit me with eggs. And I have also been known to have a bit of a stubborn streak. And I said, I wasn't driving that bus. back to the high school. We're only half a mile from the school by that time, but I wasn't driving it. And so they had to call the school, they had to bring somebody out to drive the bus back, and the police officer gave me a ride back to school. I appeared, not unexpectedly, in the back of a police car at the high school. And, one of my friends did see me, and I was very proud of that. So then I was at school, and somebody else had driven my bus to school and parked it in its spot. We had 2 rows, about 20 buses each. I had to estimate, I don't really know, but I'd say about 20 buses each, 2 big rows out in this parking lot. They'd put it in its spot. And so I didn't have exams. Now, I was accused on, I won't say no evidence, but little evidence of, creating havoc that morning while I had no exams. During that morning, while other people were taking their exams, I had kind of some free time. So, I, again, persecuted because of this misapprehension about me being a smart-ass troublemaker from my youth. I was, again, blatantly persecuted on little or no, well, probably little evidence. So, it came time, though, for me to drive the school bus home, about noonish. And so I went out and got on my bus. I got in the seat, got my stuff squared away, was getting ready to go, and I looked up, and there's dried egg on my mirror. And, God, I'd forgotten about her, because I'd been doing some other things. So, I had this rag that I used to wipe off the mirrors and stuff, and so, well, it rained a couple of days before. There was a puddle down at the bottom of the steps off my bus, so I got the rag and I walked down the steps, and I got it and I kind of squeezed it out, just right. And I turned and I stepped back up on the bus, and I took the next step, and as I did, the driver, Robbie something other, from the bus next to mine, walked up behind me and squirted me with a water pistol that he had confiscated from somebody on his bus. And I'm kind of stepping up the steps, and I thought, and I'm still going forward, and I take this rag and I kind of pop it at him. Didn't even come close to hit him. It was just like, pop it at him. At that exact moment, Mr. Clamp, the principal of the school, who for some unknown persecutorial reason hated my guts, appeared at that very moment. And he saw me do that. And he said, "Craig, you're fired. Drive your bus on." And he walked off. And Robbie looked at me, and I looked at him, and I got back off the bus, and I caught up with him. I said, "What are you talking about?" He said, "Craig, I saw what you did. You're fired. Drive the bus home, turn it in, you're fired." And so I said, So he walked on down to the end where the buses started pulling out. So I walked on down there and spoke to him about that. And I told him in great detail about his heritage, his heights, and what he could do with that school bus. And I added some graphic things so that he didn't understand. And I walked off into the parking lot, and I got in the car with a friend of mine, and I left that school bus there with that load of kids. And they stayed there for a good while. Now, epilogue number 1, for some unknown, blatantly persecutorial reason, I was kicked out of school permanently. But epilogue number 2, I got back in. A few weeks after school ended, my father, my mother, and I met with Mr. Clamp and 2 members of the Pickens County School Board, and they demanded that I apologize to Mr. Clamp. I ain't gonna do it. I ain't gonna do it. I will not. My mother cried. She asked me to. She begged me to. I ain't gonna do it. And my father understood. Said, "Get out." About 10 minutes later, my father, my mother, and 3 very pale white guys came out of that room, and I was back in school. Epilogue number 3. I was at the beginning of my senior year. They didn't have enough school bus drivers, and so they asked me to. Epilogue number 4. At the end of my senior year, Pickens County had the School Bus Driver of the Year based on safe miles. I had the longest routes. I've never had an accident. And so on awards day, at the end of my senior year, Mr. Clamp had to hand me an achievement award as I walked across the stage. And the moral of this story is, mass transportation can have a positive effect on the youth of America, and we should support it.